Welcome back, my friends, to the Derate the Hate podcast. I am your host, Wilk Wilkinson, your blue-collar sage, calming outrage and helping to navigate a world divided by fog and those who would spread that fear, outrage, and grievance. Each week, I'm sharing stories from my path and using the power of conversation and collaboration with my many great guests. Together, we chart a course toward understanding, bridging divides, and fostering a community where wisdom prevails over discord. Friends, it really is about bettering the world one attitude at a time. We did not create the hate, but together we can derate the hate. The only good thing about a bad attitude is we have the ability as individuals to change it. For me, it starts with gratitude and personal accountability. I am so incredibly grateful that you have taken the time to join me for another powerful DTH episode. Please remember to subscribe and share the DTH podcast with your network of friends. If you would like to support the show, check out the Support Us page on the Derate the Hate website. With that, my friends, let's get to it. Today, we are diving into one of the most critical topics of our time. How can we equip the next generation to navigate a world that often feels more divided by the day? As someone who's worked through my own journey from anger to understanding, I know firsthand the importance of teaching people to bridge divides. But what if we could start even earlier? What if we could teach kids, not just as they grow, but while they're still forming the skills and perspectives that will shape their entire lives, to think critically, build empathy, and connect across differences? Our guest today is Kent Lenci, a true pioneer in this space. Kent spent 20 years as a middle school educator, holding roles as a teacher, coach, and a leader before founding Middle Ground School Solutions in 2019. His mission is simple but powerful: to help prepare today's students to ease tomorrow's political polarization. From creating curriculum for the Better Arguments Project and the National Week of Conversation to writing his book, Learning to Depolarize, Kent has been on the front lines, empowering educators to teach kids how to engage with empathy and civility in a divided world. We'll talk about Kent's journey, the challenges today's youth face, and why early intervention in education is key to countering the effects of divisive media and polarized environments. Kent will also share actionable insights on fostering emotional intelligence and media literacy in kids, along with the role a human connection plays in creating lasting change. This is exactly the kind of conversation that embodies the spirit of Derate the Hate. Finding ways to turn tension into understanding and anger into action. Let's get to it. Hey friends, it's Wilk. And before we get into this week's incredible episode, I would like to tell you about another podcast that you might like from our friends at Braver Angels. A Braver Way with Monica Guzman is a podcast that's about politics, but it's so completely different from any politics show that you've heard. Each episode leaves you with a better understanding of your fellow Americans, even ones who, when you hear about them on the news, totally confound you. Their goal for the current season, which I absolutely love, is to help you face this election year without losing heart. You can find it at braverangels.org/abraverway or by searching A Braver Way wherever you get your podcasts. Friends, I absolutely love this show, and I hope you'll give it a listen. And with that, let's get to this week's episode. Here we go. Kent Lenci, thank you so much for joining me here on the Derate the Hate podcast. I've been looking forward to this conversation, looking forward to seeing and hearing more about what you do. I became familiar with you as a part of the Pro-Human Foundation. You and I both sit on the board of advisors for the Pro-Human Foundation. I was looking at this incredible group of people, looked into your background, saw what you were doing in terms of depolarization, and I'm just honored to have you here as part of this series, of advisors with the Pro-Human Foundation. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. And, it's a pleasure for me to meet you and also to get maybe a little bit better connected to those other pro-human advisors as well, whom I don't really know yet. So thanks for making this connection for all of us.
Absolutely. So cool. The idea, the idea behind this is we all have this common thing. We're all trying to better the world in some way or another. Obviously, people who are familiar with the Derate the Hate podcast know it's all about bettering the world one attitude at a time. But as we look through this group, we see all these beautiful people doing different things in their own way to better the world in which we live. So, Kent, this is a real treat for me, and for people who may not be familiar with Kent Lenci. Kent, now, correct me if I'm wrong, but you spent more than a couple decades in teaching young students, middle school, I believe, and then sometime around 2019, decided to step away from your role as a teacher within the K-12 school system, and you founded Middle Ground Solutions. Or Middle Ground School Solutions? That's correct?
Yeah, that is correct. And I've decided that's a lousy business name because nobody can ever remember it. So at some point I'm going to sharpen that up, whittle it down to something much more succinct because people throw out those 4 words in all different combinations. So that is true. Longtime teacher, and you nailed it. Headed off to do something else in 2019.
All right. Well, as far as I'm concerned, it's not so much about the name, but the mission. I know a little bit about what you're doing over there, and I want to get into that because one of the things that this country is facing right now is this plague of polarization, and I'm one who firmly believes that when you are able to connect with the impressionable minds of young people, really get at the source of the problem before it becomes a big problem, we can do wonderful things. So Kent, why don't you talk a little bit about, first of all, what was your inspiration for starting Middle Ground, and what is it that you are doing with youngsters over there?
Sure, absolutely. I'll get into it. So, I taught happily for many years. I certainly consider myself still a teacher who's just not teaching right now. And for a long time, I had grown concerned about political polarization. That I think it's something that a lot of people have tuned into really acutely recently within the last few years. Seems like it's kind of on everybody's radar, but I actually had to dig out, I'd sort of unearthed my own thinking, went back to some papers I'd written like 15 years ago, expressing my concern about political polarization. And I had some opportunities. I taught history at the middle school level, and that included teaching government and the Constitution and how this democracy works. So politics was, studying government and that kind of stuff was always in the air in my class. And I had a couple of, I have one really, I guess I'd call it transformative, certainly impressionable opportunity for me in that it made a big impression on me to connect my own students in Massachusetts with kids so I'm up here north of Boston, and this is where I've taught. And I was teaching the Civil War, and I decided it would be a lot better if we could get a Southern perspective on the Civil War. And so I found some partner schools in the South and created a project and connected my students with those students in the South, and began our dialogue by sort of surfacing stereotypes that my kids had about Southerners and that the Southern kids had about Northerners, and engaged in that dialogue before we really got into the material. The content of the Civil War and the cause of the war. And we were looking at the Confederate battle flag and different ways that it could be perceived. And so all of that, I found that was really piquing my interest and making me, I just found that it was lighting me up. That was one of the things in my teaching that I was most looking forward to. And that really felt powerful, like a powerful experience in my kids' lives as they were having this dialogue. So that was something. And then closer to when I decided to try something else, I also sort of dove into leading some colleagues through political discussions, really, like getting people on an opt-in basis in my school together in the same room to share what had led us to our kind of political viewpoints. And that was really powerful. That was, very much kind of verboten, like it was stuff you weren't really supposed to talk about in school, but
Sure.
but there was an appetite for that, and it was really a great learning experience for folks to hear from their colleagues who could see things really differently from how they might see it. And that certainly felt like doing the work that we wanted our kids to do. So those were a couple of the experiences I had that were sort of driving me in that direction. And then I just took the leap in 2019 and really wanted to lean in full time to this work of trying to prepare today's kids. This is my tagline on the website. It's the most pithy thing I can come up with, but helping to prepare today's kids to ease tomorrow's political polarization. And
Sure.
So, yeah, it's here today. And you mentioned, I jotted this down just in your intro to me, or your question, trying to tackle things before they become a big problem. I think I have great gratitude and admiration for all the organizations. I think you and I, running in these circles, are aware, like Braver Angels. I know you're deeply connected
Absolutely.
to Braver Angels, and many others that are working with adults primarily to try to turn down the heat and help people build empathy and curiosity across lines of divide and disagreement. My sights are set on the kids, partially because that's what I know. I know schools, I know how to teach, I know how kids work, but also because, I feel like we're going to get more bang for our buck. I think that if we can help prepare these kids early on over the course of years to develop the skills and the mindsets that will help them reach across lines of divide and disagreement, that they're going to be a lot better positioned than many of us are.
Sure.
Who feel like we're scrambling to try to figure out how, in the interest of the country, this is this is the long view I take. The country's got all sorts of challenges. How can we work together to solve those challenges? And it feels like that's a heavy lift for a lot of adults who are having a tough time seeing themselves reach across those lines of divide and disagreement. So, yeah, I'm hopeful that a generation of kids, when they inherit the problems that we're not going to solve for them, are going to be a little better positioned to meet the challenge.
Well, absolutely. I think that makes so much sense, and there's so many things in there, Kent, that really stand out for me. And one of the things that immediately comes to mind for me is the meme that you may have seen, or some of the listeners may have seen, but it says, "Uncoachable kids become unemployable adults." Well, the whole concept behind that is, if you really get a hold of, again, that impressionable mind and show them how to deal with certain things while they're still young and impressionable, before those bad habits are developed, just the path that they get to walk later in life becomes that much easier. There's so much that we can do. When I think of as a father and just the idea of providing that structure in my home, where we're actually having conversations at dinner tables and doing things now in hopes that it provides a better mindset for, our kids down the future, down the line in the future, doing something like this. Because one of the things and I've had so many different conversations, Kent, with people from across the spectrum. And one of the big concerns for a lot of them, no matter where they fall, is, are our young kids today going to be equipped to deal with the problem of the future? So I think what you're doing is absolutely incredible, because I do look at, whether it be Gen Z, like I've read books. I think, what is it? The iGen by is it Jin Twenge? I can't remember, but she talks about a lot in that book about uh, you know, kids today's having a hard time being able to interact with people. Certainly, people interact with people of unlike mindsets than their own. They just aren't equipped for it. And I think if more schools now were not focusing so much on the IT part of learning that so many are dealing with today, and having so much of that learning environment in this internet ecosystem that so many of us are trying to navigate, but actually working on the interpersonal skills like being able to have a meaningful, curious conversation of unlike mindsets. So from your experience, Kent, then what is the biggest challenge that you think some of these younger kids coming up into adulthood are facing today, specific to our polarization and the idea of being able to interact with those of an unlike mindset?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, right? That's a big question. And probably as I start to answer that, my mind will wander and I'll lose the threads because I think there's so many answers. You talked about the internet, the sort of digital ecosphere. I mean, that's certainly a challenge. It's a challenge for all of us who have access to technology. Mm-hmm. It is a genuine challenge to be savvy, critical consumers of media, right? In the sense that we are questioning the media we consume and sort of understand who created it and what the motivations might be and how that media is influencing us. Of course, many of us adults, wrap ourselves in sort of soothing media echo chambers, right? We like to, makes us feel better to hear, to read, to watch what we agree with. That's human nature. We want that. But we don't grow from it. In fact, I think, research suggests that we just become more extreme in our views when we're surrounded by like-minded voices. And that certainly happens online. So you take that challenge and that's just amplified, I think, for kids because, they have access to these tools that they're, in my opinion, I think a lot of folks' opinion, they're really not ready for, like a smartphone at an early age with all these inputs coming their way that they're really not ready to filter and to handle yet. So that's a huge one, right? Like growing up, coming of age at a time when they have access to all of it out there, and that's a tough one. I think that another challenge. I think it's a challenge for kids that the political discourse these days feels pretty nasty.
Yes.
So I think that, and that goes back to media, right? So sort of the more extreme political and media figures are the ones who get highlighted because they draw attention. So that's how our media system tends to work. That sort of sets the tone. And I'm finding sort of anecdotally recently, a lot of evidence that kids are feeling tired of that. So that's a challenge, right? Like some of these kids, I'm thinking about like the high school kids who are really starting to tune into politics. I've heard from a number of teachers that they are finding that their students are more disconnected this electoral cycle than they've ever been before, more disinterested, just more out of that loop. Now, is that true widely across this country? I don't know. This is true with the folks that I've talked to recently. Yeah. And these teachers are thinking, some of these kids are just kind of worn down by like their perception of nastiness out there. So I think that's a challenge. That there are lots of challenges out there. I can talk for a while.
Oh, for sure. And and thankfully, Kent, I don't think it's just the kids that are getting sick of it and worn out on all the toxicity. And, one of my main goals with this podcast, since I started doing it has been trying to make the idea of civility and being able to have these conversations again as cool as all the toxicity is. But unfortunately, toxicity sells soap, right? That fog model that I've talked so much about, fear, outrage, and grievance, has been a proven strategy for so many. And that's why some of your most toxic people get the most clicks. They have the most followers. And I'm hoping that we can change that. Organizations like yours at Middle Ground, or the Derate the Hate podcast, or Braver Angels, or, and Pro Human Foundation, showing people that, there is a much better way forward. We can do this. Talking about, and I know you've got a book as well, right? Learning to Depolarize, helping students and teachers reach across lines of disagreement. Some of the tools that you use in there, or talk about, because you mentioned it here a few minutes ago, media literacy. Media literacy, I think, is one of these things, and I think that's an important one, especially in today's environment, because so many people, and then you couple that with the social emotional learning, call it emotional intelligence. One of the things that I lacked for the vast majority of my life was any kind of emotional intelligence. Mm-hmm. And for youngsters today growing up, and young people are just, they're just not emotionally intelligent. I mean, it's something that for most people comes later in life. And so trying to compartmentalize all the ugliness that they see within our media, and these figures that are supposed to be some kind of role model, or at least leaders, representatives of who we are, but yet they're the ugliest among us. Which is also why I say far too often those who represent us are not the best of us. But yeah, the social emotional learning, and then being able to compartmentalize, really take in that media and figure out, what makes sense for us, what is true, what's not true. Talk a little bit about that, and what people can find in that book of yours that can help them. I mean, helping students and teachers. I'm assuming there's going to be a lot in there that's good for parents as well, to try and help them with their students. Talk a little bit about that for me, Kent.
Yeah. And I mean, on the book, I think you're right. I wrote that primarily. I learned when you write a book, I've only written one, and it's a pretty short one at that, but I learned a lot. One thing I learned is you have to pick your audience. So it's primarily targeted towards educators, but I did kind of have a secondary audience of parents in mind too. Mm-hmm. So if listeners feel that they have an interest in kids, they have kids of their own, or they're educators, then, they may find some good stuff in the book. But, all of that I did. I wrote a chapter, and I wrapped the media literacy and the social emotional learning into one, because what I was learning was that so much of our media diet and the way we react to media and interact with media is connected to emotions, right? Like, mm-hmm. And we've talked about alluded to the outrage, right? They're becoming aware of how media plays on our emotions is really important if you're going to be able to tune into the media you want and resist the media that's not so healthy for your diet and all of that stuff. But I totally agree. That's probably the thickest chapter in there, is the one on media literacy and social emotional learning. And I think that it, from an education standpoint, on one hand, listeners, if they're not educators especially, might think, well, kids are really media literate today, right? Like, because my teenage kids, and they've been doing this for years, are the ones to turn to in my household to, tell me how to work these things, right? Sure, so we know that, right? They're digital natives. And in that sense, they are like facile with media. But media literacy, in the sense that I'm thinking about it, is being more, is having a deeper awareness of the media itself, and learning. And what it comes down to for me having learned from media literacy experts, is that it's about the habits we build in kids. And so, viewers won't be able to see this, but I'm flashing a card at you right now as we record this, which is something from the Media Education Lab, and they have 5 key questions. I keep these things handy. This simplifies things. This is, if I had to boil it down and say, this is what we want. Things like, we want kids to ask, who is the author and what's the purpose? What techniques are used to attract and hold my attention? And there are others. So you can approach different types of media with these same questions. And if we can build that spirit of inquiry in kids so that they're challenging the media, and it's not just the media. I learned this too from an expert named Renee Hobbs, who helped me see it's not just the media we think is bad, right? So we can put like a biased label on a certain media outlet and say, well, that's what we need them to criticize and to investigate. We want them to investigate all of it, right? So as a teacher, if I bring in an article from a certain news outlet, great, let's dig into that. What's, who wrote it? For what purpose? Yeah. What might we be missing here? It's not just for the stuff that we think is biased and for whatever our political perspective is, like, oh, that's dangerous media. They need to be aware of that. It's all the media. So that's it. That would be a huge win to sort of build up those skills in a generation of kids.
Oh, without a doubt. And then another thing that you said, Kent, that I want to step back to a little bit, because I think it's one of the most important things that we can talk about, and a skill to not only teach kids but everybody around us. You mentioned the word echo chamber, or we talk about silos, echo chambers, our own comfort zone. We get stuck listening to people that we agree with, and that in turn, it kind of exacerbates our own effective polarization, right? I mean, we start to believe that those that disagree with us are worse than they actually are, and we start to align more with people that do agree with us, and start to feel a certain amount of superiority in our own views, and then this us versus them thing just continues to grow. Any kind of media, in my opinion, kind of going back to the media, whether it be media, politicians, or just people in our lives that are kind of promoting that silo, promoting that us versus them thing. I want people to just really remember, most growth happens outside of our comfort zone. Real learning is going to take place by engaging with those with whom we disagree. It doesn't mean we end up having to agree with them, but just to actually know who they are. We talked about braver angels earlier, and this is something that I mentioned so often, but the one of the most beautiful things that I've ever heard my friend Monica Guzman say is, those who are underrepresented in our life will be overrepresented in our imagination. And like Daryl Davis, our friend at the Pro Human Foundation, says, with that ignorance comes fear, and and that fear then creates anger, and that anger creates hate, and it doesn't take too long, and that us versus them, that ugliness becomes so much more ugly.
Yeah, boy, you're so right, and I think that, you're talking about this human connection busting out, started with our media echo chambers, but I hear you talking about our connection with human beings. And that's a message I find that I really harp on with teachers, because in my experience as a history teacher, I used to overemphasize and have an over-reliance on the power of critical thinking. Critical thinking is so important. Kids need to learn how to think. But I used to lean more heavily on that as a remedy. And if we just give kids plenty of good information, they'll reason their way through to to solutions, right? But it's not about the issues always. It's not about the facts always. It's often about the humans. And you talked about it, this affective polarization. It's often how we feel about other folks that we may not know so well yet. And we may, through those media echo chambers, like you said, Monica Guzman puts it as, I think I hadn't heard her say that before, they'll be overrepresented in our imaginations. Yeah, I think that's what builds what some researchers call the perception gap, that, we're really lousy at knowing what many of us at what makes people tick across the political divide.
Absolutely.
So, I think that's a job for educators too, is to be aware of that. That's part of the work I do, is to try to shine a light on some of those tendencies that we know about from sort of psychology and sociology research, and how we work as societies, help teachers understand that so that they can help feature for kids opportunities to connect with people that, they think are across the divide. I go back to my early roots of that project and connecting my kids in Massachusetts with kids in Tennessee and Alabama. And there was a reason that felt powerful, right? And it felt powerful for the kids because we were connecting at a human level. But while I'm talking, it makes me, I want to seize the moment to go back and ask you. In our pregame, I didn't get to find out the answer to this question, and I've told you a lot about what drove me in my direction. But I'm still interested in knowing what got you headed into this direction as well, and in starting this podcast. And you've got my origin story. So what is it that drove you this way?
Yeah, really. And thank you, Kent, for the question. The thing for me was I spent a lot of my life miserable, angry, a lot of animosity from different things growing up. And then I started falling into, being a truck driver for the majority of my adult life. I mean, I've been in transportation pretty much for my whole adult life, some as a driver, some as a manager. And like many truck drivers, I fell into this cycle of listening to a lot of talk radio. Now, one thing that does separate me is I didn't listen to specifically one side or the other. I listened to all kinds of different things, and trying to take in as much as I could. Mm-hmm. But I certainly fall far more on the conservative side of things than other. But I did find myself becoming one of those people who was effectively polarized. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but I clearly was becoming far more angry at those who were on the other side of the political spectrum from where I was at, and I didn't like all the anger that I'd had in my personal life growing up. Now I'm becoming more angry, and I had worked so long to try and work through my own anger from my past, and then started realizing that a lot of those same feelings were there for politics. I was somebody who shunned politics, but wanted nothing to do with politics for the longest time. But anyways, I found myself becoming more polarized, more angry, and thought that I could somehow fix that. And my initial efforts for fixing that did nothing. It just pissed more people off. I had people, just saying some of the most awful things to me online. And I was going to start this haters happy hour thing and start pointing out all the ugly things that people were saying to me. And I was still kind of engaging with those people online. And I had this epiphany one day of how stupid it was to get into these keyboard battles with people I didn't know, was never going to meet, was never going to accomplish anything, and certainly was not going to change their mind. So I started thinking, and it just came to me that, there is a much better way than pointing out. There's like we said earlier in our conversation, Kent, that just the models being what they are, the most toxic people tend to get the most clicks. They don't need any more promotion for what they are doing. But I did quickly realize that we need more people being vocal about the idea of bringing people together in conversation, because I quickly realized that conversations with people of unlike mindsets was going to do more to bring people together and make a better world than anything else was going to, you know?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
so that's really the direction that I decided that this podcast had to go. It had to be one of these that obviously mood and mindset for me is a huge thing. So that was why the bettering the world one attitude at a time thing came in, and just the idea that we can better our world by being better individuals, and our sphere of influence would certainly start to, as somebody who believes in the idea that bad moods and, smiles and bad moods are contagious, so choose wisely. Our sphere of influence is going to catch on to what we are doing. So I started to do this thing where, I'm trying to empower people who are bettering the world in some way. That's why with the Pro-Human Foundation, when I had the idea for this series of bringing on the board of advisors, looking at all the great people that our colleagues within that group, I'm like, these people are doing some incredible work, and we need to highlight that. And so that's I hope that answered your question. I mean, but that's really, really what it was. I think we need to keep showing the world that there is a much better way to do things than what we see in most of our media, social media, that internet ecosystem that is full of that fear, outrage, and grievance. There is a better way, and we can certainly better the world.
And it's just interesting, as I'm hearing you talk too, you just mentioned outrage, and I heard you use the word mood, right? Mood and mindset. And I think your anger, right? You're talking about that anger that you developed really is a kind of a central character in that story. And all of that kind of brings me back to what the opportunities that I see to help kids. Mm-hmm. There's a tool that I suggest to teachers called the mood meter. You're talking about mood, right? There's a simple little graphic, that comes out of the sort of university research realm that names moods and sort of has them on a couple of axes. And for kids, to have that up on the wall and say, hey, let's start this conversation and tell me where you find yourself on that mood meter right now. That's a way of helping kids name an emotion, name what they're feeling, which is an important first step in emotional regulation and being masters of our emotions and being aware of how they fit into our our dealings with other people and our perceptions of other people. So it's interesting to hear you talk about sort of your growing awareness in this journey of how anger was heading you in a direction you didn't really want to go. And that's a type of awareness we're trying to help kids have early on, be in tune with their emotions. So that's interesting.
It's incredible. And like I said, if we can help the youngsters get a handle on that and be prepared for what they're going to deal with in life struggles, I think we're so much better as a society, as a world, as just our big human family. Kent Lenci, this has been an incredible conversation. I can't not tell you how much I appreciate it. The work we're doing together at the Pro-Human Foundation, knowing that you're tuned in to Braver Angels as well, and we've got a long and beautiful future in this work, and we will make the world a better place. And thank you so much. Just real quick, where can people find out more about you? And then we'll make sure that that's in the show notes as well.
People can find me. The best place is to go to my website, middlegroundschools.com. Mm-hmm. And there are resources there people might find interesting. Done a little writing, some blogs, so on and so forth. I'm on LinkedIn too. People can follow me there. I've gotten off other social media. Partially for, what we've been talking about. I'm just I'm really not that interested. So, kind of narrowing my digital footprint a little bit. And that would be, I love connecting with people, but I also just wanted to send back to you the thanks. I mean, it's a pleasure to meet you, Wilk, and to know you now and to be, part of, sort of growing awareness of who the other pro-human advisors might be. But I've really enjoyed this conversation as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kent Lenci. We will definitely do more together in the future. Thank you.
Right on. Thanks.
Friends, if there's anything in this episode that provided exceptional value to you, please make sure to hit that share button. Share it with your friends, share it far and wide. And of course, if you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe right from our website so you can get the Derate the Hate podcast sent to your email inbox every week. So this is Wilk wrapping up for the week saying get out there, be kind to one another, be grateful for everything that you've got, and remember it's up to you to make each and every day the day that you want it to be. If there is something that you would like to share with me, you can catch me on most social media platforms, or you can email me directly, wilk@wilksworld.com. With that, my friends, I am going to back on out of here, and we will catch you next week. Take care.